and welcome to the Huddle Breakdown with me, Laura Bradburn. I am joined, as always, by James and Alan. James, I'll come to you first. How you doing?
Good. I'm excellent. I'm officially an empty nester. So I asked my wife, when does the copious amounts of sex happen? And that hasn't kicked in yet. So I don't know what the hell's going on, but I have that to look forward to, Laura. So that's gonna arrive later this week. So I'm hopeful. Forget about Kazakhstan, Champions League. That's what I'm focused on this week. Well, begging and groveling and trying my hardest.
Your tone does sound in hope more than expectation, but you can update us on that next week if you so choose. I don't think either Alan or I asked, did we, Alan?
It was information that I could very well do without, if I'm honest. Moving along.
Yes, moving along. Alan, without giving us any information that we didn't ask about, how are you doing?
Oh, really well. Yeah. My other half's been away all weekend on a journey to London. So no problem at all. So we're getting into the 2 games a week now. So my life becomes even more glued to the laptop. So hey, but this wouldn't do it if I didn't enjoy it.
Indeed, 2 games a week. We had 2 games last week. We'll have 2 games this week. We are going to cover the outcome of the Livingston match at the weekend. Obviously, we beat them 3-0 at Celtic Park on Saturday. We will do a slight touch on the Kairat Almaty game, but probably at the time you're hearing this and the time it's first published, this will be published on the day of the match. So a lot of the discussion about that will be left until later in the week. For Alan and James to look back on, but we will do some sort of preview before the day is out, and then maybe if we get a chance we'll have a look at what's going on in the rest of the league and how that's progressing at the moment. James, I'll come to you first. Oh no, I do have a little interesting story actually first before we go into the Livingston match. So I am going to the Celtic versus Manchester United Legends match on 6th of September. I'm taking my nephew. And before anybody comes in and says, what are you doing giving this board more money? I did buy them on the 6th of July, right? So I was anticipating multiple signings by that point. But anyway, my sister said to me, do you know when the tickets are getting sent out and blah, blah, blah. And I went on to check the order. And there's a £4.50 booking fee that it said in brackets, will be collected in Almaty. Now, why I'll be going to Almaty to pay a booking fee in cash for a Celtic charity match at Celtic Park, I've no idea. But maybe that gives you an idea of where this board are at, James.
That's going to be an expensive fee. Maybe $1,200 for that return flight to go pay a $450 fee? That you are a committed supporter. I give you that's a lot of freaking charity. Good,
absolutely.
Good on you.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm there come hell or high water, come booking fee or not. But anyway, we'll get to the Livingston match first. Alan, I'll come to you first in the Livingston match. From my point of view, certainly not the most entertaining first half. Much improved in the second half, not just in terms of goals, but in terms of the way we played. What was your overall thoughts of the game before we get down to the nitty-gritty of it?
I think, well, I suppose it was a bit of relief. I mean, let's not pretend that we weren't very nervous about this. And but what pleased me wasn't just the outcome, and there was a little bit of, given we don't know who's going to be bought and sold between now and the end of the window, just winning the damn game type of thing. But actually, the performance was fine. I mean, the XG difference I had it pretty large. I mean, well over 2.5, huge. So it was a well-earned, well-deserved win with very little threat defensively. Sorry, I mean they had a flurry of chances like in the 90th minute and beyond, which kind of padded it out a little bit. And given the context of 8 changes, which as we all know is hugely unsettling, difficult to kind of get momentum and speed into a game when you've got that many changes, I thought we should be pretty pleased with it actually. So nothing. I think we'll get into the detail of it. And my one little kind of to stay on brand, to be a bit of a worrywart. My one concern that I had as the game went on was if they score first, are we capable of scoring 2 goals? And that was nagging away at me all the way through until we scored. I'll be honest, and that is a concern. But we know that because of the state of the front line. But in the end, I thought it was a good performance and a good outcome.
Yeah, James, the 8 changes Alan is referencing there. I have to say, when I sat down in my seat at Celtic Park and looked up the lineup, as is my new habit, I did immediately feel sick to the pit of my stomach. I thought, what the heck are we going to see today? Bearing that in mind, what did you think when you first saw the lineup, and how did the overall impression of the match bear out in comparison to it by the end?
Yeah, it was one of those where you see the team sheet and you're like, oh boy. But I got excited then because my man crush was in the selection, which is Inamura. But then it was like, well, like we actually have a lot of guys here that we need to kind of figure out what's the plan. And every data point, every game, is Bernardo going to be the backup six to McGregor, or is he going to leave? Is Engels going to play on the right or the left? Is Yang actually going to be part of the plan or not? I mean, there's obviously a mountain of evidence of some of these things, but seeing Murray. So I think it was seeing all of them together, as Alan said, the 8 at a time, given the relative depth of the squad, which was kind of the sticker shock. And then once I kind of thought about it, I was like, this is actually going to be really interesting. And I think ultimately very effective, meaning that, they basically, we almost bought time. So if you think about it through the perspective of just buying time so that the people that need to play on Tuesday are rested enough to be able to be more effective in doing that, we were extremely effective at doing that. I mean, they had effectively no chance of scoring of any material degree until we brought on kind of starting in, I think it was the 58th minute when we started to bring in kind of the first teamers, so to speak, and then the rest of the game. So I thought they did what they needed to do. They held kind of serve, so to speak, to use a tennis metaphor. They held serve as long as they needed to so that we could kind of close the game out in the second half. So, wasn't the prettiest first half, but I thought it didn't really need to be looking back now. And I thought it was ultimately kind of a good game plan. And I think players overall were fine. I mean, there was no one that jumped out at me and I was like, oh, geez, this guy's out his depth. I thought everyone kind of did their job, did their role within the context of the opponent and kind of the plan for the week, so to speak, in getting, those kind of KPIs accomplished.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. It looks like a very smart decision in retrospect because we came away with the win. If we hadn't come away with the win, some people might have had other thoughts about the fact that we were resting players and things like that. But I don't think anybody can criticise Rodgers for taking into account the immense amount of travelling the players are going to have to do over the next 48 hours or whatever it was after the game and the game in between as well, and the altitude and heat that's getting played at. So I think he made the right decision and it all worked out in the end. Alan, let's get into some of the individual performances, and I thought we would start with a positive one. Dane Murray is getting a lot of plaudits for his performance. I'm always wary to couch a question too positively to you in case you turn around to me and say, well, actually, his passing score wasn't great, or his whatever. But I thought he did play well. I thought he looked assured. I thought he looked confident and comfortable. What do you make of the opportunity he's been given and how well he's taken it at the moment, these increasing number of performances? Do you see a significant role for him this season?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, at 22, he looks to have the attributes that you'd want in terms of clearly the physical size, but also a decent amount of pace and a willingness to, an ability to break lines with his passing. I mean, these are all the things that are the basics for any sort of Celtic centre half. Needs to play a high line, needs to be able to recover quickly, needs to be able to fight aerial duels, needs to be able to pass the ball well. These are all, as I say, the kind of basics. And then you start looking at the more high end stuff in terms of positioning, decision making, anticipation, all that stuff. How press resistant he is, etc. That will get stressed at Champions League level. We obviously didn't really see that in this game at all. But we know how Livingston play. 5-4-1. They're going to get the ball forward very directly. They're going to always have some basketball player as the striker, and there's going to be plenty of duels there for him. And he did pretty well. I think he won the most duels in the game of any player. And I'll come into his passing. I'll cover the negatives first, and I'll do the positives. So he clearly tired very badly towards the end of the game, and that you might think, well, that's natural. He's not played many games, 90 minutes for Celtic. Although he's played Championship football, for example, the intensity level, the concentration, the physical impact, etc., is far greater, and therefore there's a bit of it's kind of natural. But the centre halves are generally like the goalkeeper, the ones that probably do the least amount of running in general, and probably the least amount of sprinting. And so that's just a slight concern in terms of his conditioning, something he'll need to work on to not fade physically as badly as he did, because it manifested itself in two really terrible turnovers in the final kind of few minutes. One where he passed the ball straight to a player Silla, who then ran on into the box. And to his credit, he produced an absolutely world-class sliding tackle to stop the shot. But a quicker, more mobile forward than Silla, that would have ended up with a shot on target, because he was right in the middle of the goal. And then he got tackled by Yengi in the last seconds, flattened, and again, Yengi was one-on-one with McGregor, backing him into the box. Now, these are situations you just simply cannot be in Championship level. These were serious errors. A centre-half cannot give the ball away like that. And in those situations, his passing overall he was passing at 88%. That's too low for a central defender. It needs to be 95, 96%. And the sort of cherry on top for a Celtic centre-half is, you're passing accurately, you're rarely giving the ball away, and you're breaking lines. That's the standard that has to be met for that position for this club. Now, they're all the kind of, I suppose, the negatives, if you want to frame it that way. But actually, he did complete more pack passes than any other player. He had the most. Sorry, not the most. I think Ralston had the most, but he had the highest packing score. Which is probably the most important thing. Packing score of 86 from 11 pack passes. So that was great. In fact, he took more defenders out of the game with his passing, 11, than any other player. He had two absolutely superb passes where he not only broke the first line, he actually found, I think it was Nygren on one occasion and Yamada on another. He virtually took out the whole Livingston team with two passes, and both of those passes led directly to shooting opportunities. So he created two chances from passing almost on the halfway line. That is top end. That is brilliant. Want to see more of that. And as I say, the other thing that he did that was kind of consistent in the sense that I think it happened maybe 5 times during the game was he a little bit like Carter Vickers and Rogic used to do. He had that ball arrowing out to the right wing to Nygren, and him and Nygren would have a nice thing going on where he took out the striker and the 4 midfielders, because they were quite narrow, so there was a bit of space out wide, and he got Nygren running basically at the defence on a number of occasions, and that was great. That's great to see. That's a real bonus as well. Couple of nice bits of anticipation where kind of mopped up loose balls. I mean, Inamura, I'm sure, will come to. They were targeting him with long balls. He's not great in the air. He's going to lose, more than 50% probably of his aerial duels. But the likes of and Scales would usually be the one that would go with the striker. And we know Scales is kind of 60-40 probably in terms of his aerial duels. So Murray was the one that was kind of sweeping up a lot, and his anticipation was good. His positioning was good. As I say, that last-ditch tackle to rescue his own bad error was a world-class saving tackle, really. So yeah, we were chatting before we came online, and I was thinking this morning as I was watching the game and seeing him, thinking, why do you buy Nawrocki and Lagerbielke when you've got Murray in the room? Same as we were saying, why do you buy? Why did you get rid of Iwata to buy Bernardo? I think, as James said, and as I've always said, why did we get rid of O to buy Ida? These things make no sense to me, and they're not. They're just wasting money. And this is another example. Now, and I think with Murray there has been a lot of injury, so he probably needed that time last season when I think he was at Queen's Park for a fair chunk of time. So maybe we cut the club a bit of slack there. But to me, he looks like the sort of player that, it may not work out for him. I don't know, but he's good enough to be worn a chance and warrant a position in the squad. And why go out and spend 3-4 million on a centre back when you've got a Dane Murray in there that could save you a lot of money and potentially make you a lot of money. I'm not saying he's going to be a superstar. I'm just saying there's enough there to work with and enough positives there that you should be giving the kid every chance.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think injuries has played a major factor in why he's been sort of around the scene for so long, but hasn't established himself in any significant way. Much the same as Stephen Welsh, although I think Stephen Welsh is having a lot more hard of a time of it with injuries than anybody recently. James, everybody talks about the fact that, you know, as good as Kieran Tierney is, we definitely need a backup for him because his fitness can't be guaranteed, or his lack of injury can't be guaranteed, I should say. But very few people talk about the fact Carter Vickers probably falls into that category as well, of undoubtedly one of the best players we've got at the club, but we are going to need to rest him at various times or not play him at certain venues that have certain types of pitches and things like that. Is Dane Murray, is he enough in that mould, do you think, to take up that mantle as the kind of alternative to Carter Vickers? Did you see enough on Saturday that would suggest to you that is the case?
I think directionally, yes. I mean, we always say a single game is, you know, never enough to really derive any kind of long-term or extrapolation on what's going to happen. But I think his body of work so far, I agree with Alan. I mean, it's really functionally what you're talking about is maybe a fourth center back this season. You know, let's assume, you know, probably one of the left center backs won't be here in perpetuity. But, you know, rumors are it might be Trusty. We'll see. I don't know with his plantar fasciitis if that'll change any kind of you know, plans. But JSP is likely to be within the top three. Let's say some people are debating whether he'll be the starter at left center back or not. But and then you're basically talking Scales and Murray. And I think, yeah, I mean, this comes back to this whole conversation. It would drives me a little bit nuts with Rodgers is what I think is incoherent inconsistencies with some of his explanations on the decision-making rationale for certain things. So the idea that we're going to have Champions League level backups at really more positions than maybe a couple is probably, you know, kind of dopey. Like, it's just not practical. It's not going to happen. Not unless we're going to dramatically shift our entire financial situation. Are you going to be able to afford and pay, or we're going to have, you know, a magical academy drop down from the heavens, and all of a sudden we're producing world-class 18-year-olds right and left. It's just not going to happen. So it's okay. Well, you just need functional. You need serviceable people that can play on those Saturdays or Sundays after a midweek game. To your point, Laura, whether it's to manage fitness issues or, you know, because we saw that already with Alistair Johnston, and we saw that with Ange's first season. As you have depth issues in the squad and you flog people, you're going to incur injuries. I mean, it's just part and parcel. It's just very likely to happen. So to prevent that, and it's not as if we don't have, that's just normal. And if you have guys like Tierney, you have Carter Vickers, other people, you know, sounds like we're going to sign Balak Wisha. He's had some soft tissue muscle injury history. You know, so if you have people that have injury histories, it gets even bigger priorities that you've got to have people to rotate through and be proactive. And Rodgers said that himself. And we lauded the team last season about how proactive they were in rotation, and that plausibly that was a major contributing factor of the fact that we had cut down soft tissue injuries a good bit last season. So I think Murray's perfectly suitable domestically, like Ralston was on the weekend against Livingston. He did a fine enough job. I know everyone's not the biggest. Fine enough. We won 3-0 is the point, right? So there's a margin of error domestically against 5, 6, maybe 7 teams that you can have some of these guys part of the squad, and you know, they're going to do a job. Basically, that's what's going to happen. And I think that's a floor for Murray. And to Alan's point, if he and we talked about this in other episodes recently, if he can make a leap in some of these other areas, kind of fine tune some of his passing and or become more of that monster physically where he's just dominant physically, then maybe he has that upside. And I think it's worth seeing because, we can kind of fill both of those needs while giving him that opportunity.
I just want to come back to you on one of the points you raised there because I want to move on to your man crush Inamura. He was part of the reason that we were talking about that before we came on air about the sort of mixed messaging from Rodgers. For me personally, and this is a complete and utter judgment of the character of a man I don't know, but I do get the impression that Brendan Rodgers thinks that he's more intelligent than 90% of the people he talks to and therefore can mix his messages all he wants and you're not going to pick him up for it because he's outsmarted you once again. I don't think that that's the case, but I do get the impression that that's what he thinks he's doing. But where within all that does Inamura fall for you, James? Because he was very outspoken when he came in, and I know people have said we kind of need to let that go, and but the point is he was very, very definite about the fact he's not going to be good enough for us. He's going to definitely go out on loan. He may still do, but he hasn't been included in the Champions League squad. But there's no doubt to me, okay, I think people are exaggerating quite how good he was on Saturday, but there is no doubt to me that he is more than capable of playing against the majority of domestic opponents at least. And like you said, maybe coming in after European games and playing in games where other players are tired. Where do you think he fits into that whole conversation? And do we have any understanding of why Rodgers was so outspoken about him at the start?
Yeah, we can speculate. And my sense and our conversation when that happened was that it was probably amidst the political battle that was going on behind the scenes relative to the transfer window, which is all kind of, understandable from an impulse perspective. I think the question becomes one of judgment to basically publicly undermine a new signing the way that he did. And, I put out a tweet after the game. I think, understandably, it's Twitter. It's hard to get fulsome context for one's hot take on Twitter. I know I can rely on you to relate to that.
I keep trying.
Right. But basically, I said in so many words that the game that Yamada and Inamura played made his comments look like, he was an ass. And I didn't mean that they were world beaters or had the best performances of all time. It's just that the way that he's been talking about these two players, because they were club signings, or it's almost like they were not good enough for Celtic. And then if you look at those performances relative to other players at the team, it's like they didn't look any abnormally bad. I've seen plenty of other players that, like the £9 million striker that Rodgers wanted last summer that have looked much worse in games.
Yeah, he was talking about them like they were Manny Perez and Andrew Gutman.
Exactly. So it was that disparity that I was referencing that, to me, it undermines credibility and raises questions as far as, okay. And then you descend down this potential rabbit hole of, okay, well, what's the actual decision-making matrix here? Is how much of he's just not that good at making these kind of decisions at times. Alan mentioned for Ida and Awada for Bernardo, and I've talked about it endlessly. People can read Ian Graham's book. I mean, I think a lot of people in the analytics world hold this view of Rodgers. This is not a strength of his, profiling players specifically and how they fit with his playing style and system. How much of it's that, how much of it's now he's kind of committed, and it's how do you back down from sending this guy out on loan, that kind of thing. So all that is separate. I think the player himself, the reason why I have this man crush is I think, and some of this is stats, some of it's my own analysis, some of it's, I know it's going to sound shocking, I do actually use non-quantitative judgment to analyze things. And to me, he strikes me, I wrote in my column that went out, my weekly column that went out on huddlebreakdown.com on Monday, that I think he has it. And what does that mean? Someone who has the kind of nexus of technical ability, vision, and decision-making, that they can be a deep-lying playmaker. and they can do it at a level that where the risk reward skews positive, right? So again, by definition, someone who's going to try and do that from deep, it's not going to come across all the time. We talk about this in the context of Hitate all the time, which is, I think the evidence for him historically is that, it doesn't really fall enough to the positive versus the negative over time that makes him like a top notch. And I'm not saying Inamura is, I'm saying that to me, he shows signs that very possibly, plausibly could be an innate strength. And that's such a valuable skill set for a team like Celtic in 40% of our games, that even if he's mediocre or even not even mediocre defensively, I think you make space for someone because he has top-notch speed. He had for his position. He has good speed. He has good quickness. He seems to be a worker. He's not like one of these guys that's not trying or he's a coaster. And he was playing in a dreadful defensive team in Japan. And everything I looked at, he was trying hard. Like you could easily check out in those kind of situations. And he looked like a guy who put forth, a lot of effort. So I think, back to Alan's comment on resource utilization is kind of how I think about it. It looks like we're going to sign this guy from Argentina, from Boca Juniors, on a loan so that we can loan another guy out. And I haven't looked at that. What's his, I think it's a hot sauce from Korea. What's his last name? I can't remember. So, but so if we sign him, it's like, okay, is he going to deliver? Because he's not going to be good enough for Champions League. Like, it's just absurd. A backup at Boca Juniors that we're getting on loan and have a £2 million, who's going to be 28, I think, this year. The idea that he's the guy that's going to be Champions League level to back up Tierney, to me, on its face, is absurd. So it's the question of how do we have a backup that can actually provide value and bring something to the table. And I think that's in Inamura's profile, knowing that there's going to be defensive issues. He's, again, if you think about what his profile is, he basically has 1 year as a professional on a bad team in Japan, playing left center back. He's been thrown across the world to play left back in a system that's completely foreign to him, in a language he probably doesn't speak. And he walked into this game against Livingston, and I got a lot of responses on Twitter. Oh, for F's sake, it was only Livingston. Well, my column I put out, if you look at possession value models, he basically was about 85th percentile relative to all of Greg Taylor's performances at Celtic. Okay, so he just, all of this context, playing with basically, a backup team, and he comes in and does this. Yes, it's just one game, but to me, that speaks to the fact that he's got a skill set here and a toolkit that could develop dramatically. So he's just walking off the street and doing this. Oh, what happens if he actually gets, 25 appearances and gets real minutes and exposure? So I'm resigned. I don't think that's going to happen. I do hope we pull a rabbit out of the hat and finally do a smart loan. I mean, that we send him somewhere where he's actually going to play in a system that helps him develop. I'd even like to see him play at, defensive midfield. I think that could be, he's kind of the opposite of Ayer. I think he should go out on, he's so far been a center back, but I'd like to see him at defensive mid. But, we'll see. I'm not holding much hope in that regard.
Marcelo Sarachi. Sarachi, I think is how you would pronounce it.
Well, I've been holding a joke for you, Laura. So
go for it.
This is, an Americanism. Buffalo wings, right?
Yeah.
One of the big mistakes you make as a young man in America is you go get drunk and you eat buffalo wings with hot sauce and then forget to wash your hands before you go to the bathroom, right? So it's very painful. I don't want us to play Sriracha next to JSP because it could be a painful thing.
I mean, but let's not get into it too. But how would you know if that was a painful thing given JSP's name?
I mean, I'm inferring. I would guess these are delicate things. So
some people might like it. That's all I'm saying. All right. Anyway, back to Inamura and Alan. We will go on to some other players, but I just want to get your thoughts on Inamura before we close out that conversation, I think there's a lot of a pendulum swinging emotionally about Inamura. Some people are totally on Rodgers' side. The manager knows what he's talking about. This guy's not good enough. Some people, myself included, have swung completely the other way, and because he's not absolute crap, we think he's great. Where do you stand on Inamura and an objective sense of how good and how useful he actually would be to us to keep around?
Yeah, well, again, it's fun to have a first impression. Everyone does. I don't form a definitive opinion to at least 900 minutes, as I've said before. But in terms of what I saw at the weekend there, in terms of just basic competency, and again, I look at things like, first touch, playing with your head up, basic physical attributes like speed, obviously, positioning, playing the actual role that you've been given, all that sort of stuff, he looked absolutely fine to me in terms of just a level of competence that I think has got nothing in common with the way that Rodgers chose to portray him. That's incredibly frustrating. I'm incredibly frustrated we're after this absolute journeyman 28-year-old Uruguayan who can't get into a really poor side when, you've put this guy in and he's been absolutely serviceable. And again, I'm not claiming he's a world beater. I'm just saying, in terms of if we can save money on loaning in a 28-year-old Uruguayan international and put that money towards a striker or an attacking player, there's no reason why having Inamura on the small amount of evidence that we've seen as a backup left back is a major problem for the vast majority of games. It really isn't. And actually, it could turn out to be really good. I'm not saying it will for sure. We don't know. But
and to your point, Alan, as James said, people coming back to him and saying it's only effing Livingston. Well, it's only effing whoever for most of the league. Like, if he's good enough, he's good enough for the domestic opponent we're facing.
So listen, he again. I'll start with if you want with the negatives and then kind of build out. But yeah, he lost quite a few of his aerial duels. In the same way that Greg Taylor, being much smaller than Inamura, was targeted with high balls to the left back position. So it was with Livingston. He fought for every ball. He actually was pretty good on ground duels because he's quite quick and he's quite tall. As I say, not brilliant at aerial duels. I'm kind of not too excited about that because I think net he's got the recovery pace. Not evidenced too much, but as James says, he looks basically functionally quite quick for a defender. It's the passing. I mean, I can't emphasize. You might get, maybe 10 duels in a game, but you're going to ask him to complete 85 passes. So what's more important? What's going to really lead you towards scoring a goal? It's getting the ball up the park. I thought he played within himself. There was a moment about I think it was about 20 minutes in where he tried a ball from the back that was like a through ball, and nobody read it. Nobody read it, and I saw, I think it was Scales, have a word with him, and I was just a bit nervous that are they kind of reining him in a little bit, because he's actually a bit of a maverick in the context of the way Celtic play, a very highly positional style of football, very systematized, very much the modern paradigm of how football teams play. Not it's not to the extent of every run is rehearsed, but it's kind of, if someone stood in this channel, you don't go into that channel, you go into this channel. It's all that kind of thing. If the midfielders moved out to overlap the fullback, then you hit the box. It's kind of rehearsed to that extent. Inamura is the sort of guy that's suddenly going to see an angle that no one else has seen, and he's going to put it there, and he's going to do it accurately, and you've got to read it. And he tried it a couple of times, and none of them came off. But he didn't try many. And his packing was kind of average. It was okay. He kind of, to me, looked like he was playing well within himself. But where he kind of came to life a little bit was he had 2 or 3 moments where he was out in an attacking position, and he shaped, whipped some beautiful crosses. There was one that Yamada got his head to. The goalkeeper tipped it over the bar. There was a couple more in the second half that didn't come to anything. But just the pace he put on it and the shape of the cross, the trajectory of it, not too high, not too low, with a lot of pace on it and a good bit of bend. I thought technically that was brilliant. And technically on the ball, he looks really, really strong player. plays with his head up again, good awareness. So I think he looks a really promising player, just from the very limited amount I've seen. When I say promising, I'm not going to say he's going to be a Celtic starter for 10 years. I'm not going to say he's going to shine at Champions League level. I'm saying, he looks functional. We should stick with him. We've bought him. We've invested in him. Get him in the squad. I wouldn't have any worries about that. He'll have his ups and downs, but don't go and get a 28-year-old journeyman from Uruguay. What's the point of that? You're just wasting money, wasting resources. We need that money for attackers. So, I thought he was fine. I think there's a lot more to come. I don't think we saw any of the special sauce that he could. I thought we saw glimpses, but nobody read them because they were just so out of kilter with how Celtic played.
Kyogo would have read them.
Yeah, and Yamada might in time, because Yamada's again Yamada was making loads of runs that nobody picked up. Again, people aren't used to his specific style of movement. Apart from Murray picked him out with the beauty of a through ball. But and Inamura's got that. Inamura is capable of taking out the whole opposition team with one pass, and that, against a packed defence, that is gold dust when you're trying to break down some of these teams in Scotland. So even for that reason alone, he's worth persisting with, because that's a kind of high-end skill.
Yeah, the other thing I noticed, and again, I noticed it in looking at him in Japan, and it seems relatively simple, but so few of our players, and I think generally players do not do it, is, if you're on the left wing as the fullback, and, when you're playing at Celtic in this shape that we're now deploying this season, it seems, there's going to be a lot of this opportunity where if you're going to play a switched ball, if you kick the ball to Scales, who's going to take 2 touches and then turn the ball and kick it over to Dane Murray, Inamura is the type says, F that. I'm whipping a ball directly to Dane Murray at pace, delivered straight into his stride, who then can play the ball wide to the right wing. And that quick, his ability to identify it, to do it technically, and to do it at pace with the ball delivered he passes the ball in a different way than anyone else that we have.
Yeah.
And that crispness and the velocity with which that movement can occur, it's just, to me, it's invaluable in the sense that getting defenses to have to move quicker. That's what this is all about, disorganizing settled defenses. And that's just it's a very small thing, but it can have huge implications, particularly against organized, narrow, disciplined defenses, which is what we're talking about here. It's not that he's going to, break down Barcelona and whip Yamal's ass in the Champions League. I'm not worried about that. It's Falkirk at home in frickin' February when it's 0-0 in the 80th minute, and we need someone who can do something with the ball. And he's, I think, somebody that can do that.
You reminded me, James, the first thing I noticed about him actually is the pace at which he passes to people. He absolutely drills it at people. And that's what good players do, who are used to playing with good players. They trust, they say, right, I'm going to find you. It's up to you to control it. And to beat the press, or to beat the line, I've got to pass it at this pace. And that's what really good players do. And then a few times, some players' techniques, I won't mention any names, were found wanting, because he absolutely fizzed a couple of balls into people in the final third that they couldn't take, because he just absolutely belted it at them. Not stupidly. They were, as you say, his technique looks absolutely beautiful when he's passing the ball. And again, you cannot underestimate that basic thing. Passing is what Celtic do more than any other club in the world. I mean, you're talking Manchester City
700
levels,
times a game,
Barcelona levels of ball domination here. I'm not even. You can look it up. I think I'll go on to Opta or whatever. Celtic are in the top 3 for volume of passing in a game. So if you've got people that can do it really well, right, and at pace, that is really important.
Yeah, Alan, I don't know why you're so worried about us signing a Uruguayan left back. We've got a pretty decent recent history with Uruguayan left backs, I'm sure. But we'll see what comes of that. I did get excited when I saw Celtic linked with the Boca Juniors player, but that's just the old brain of mine going back over the years. Yeah,
the Raquelme,
Martin
the
Palermo,
Raquelme,
Raquelme, Diego, dare I say, but he doesn't sound anywhere near that, unfortunately. But we can only judge him when and if he comes in. Alan, I'll come back to you to pick the next player we go for, because we were talking about before the show started about the number of performances we wanted to pick out. There was Nygren, there was Kenny, there was Shin. Who do you want to kind of highlight for a little bit of a deep dive next?
Yeah, I think we should talk about Yamada. We obviously, had a lot of issues in the striker area this season. In fact, I don't think a striker scored yet. And we've had 4 games out of 5 at home against relatively minor opposition. So it was Yamada's chance at the weekend. I thought he was fine, right? I'm not going to again sit here and pretend that this was some kind of world class revelatory display, but I think a lot of the things which again we saw before he signed, his intrinsic pace. His ability to, his running off the ball, I thought was tremendous. The number of times he a bit like Kyogo, he must have made 15 runs for one attempt that actually was anywhere, trying to pick him out, etc. He dropped deep and had a couple of good bits of link up play. He also had a couple of bad bits of link up play. I think we called that as not particularly being a strength of his. So that was a bit kind of mixed. Yeah, he did have that great chance, really, from Dane Murray's superb pass, which he kind of mishit and fluffed a little bit in the first half. He had that near post shot from again. I think it was Inamura actually that put Yang through, and Yang, for once, he actually found a man with his cross, and he just put it past the post. But again, he got ahead of the defender. He was just outside the post, unfortunately. I think if he'd been central to the goal, between the posts, he would have any contact. Basically, I think it was such a short distance, and he got such a good contact on it, it would have flown in. So that was nice movement just to get ahead of the 2 defenders that were bearing down on him on that one. He had a pretty good sort of pack receipt score. His attacking threat score was decent. Expected scoring contribution 0.58. These are all kind of okay, given that he only played 58 minutes, I would say. So I would say that added to the fact that he looks a trier. Again, he looks like someone who's going to give you everything. He's going to run all day. He's going to keep making the runs. No, he didn't score. He didn't get a huge amount of the ball. It was kind of classic. We've seen Kyogo have games like this, so I think there's potentially again a lot more to come from him, and we should give the guy a go, because honestly, he's the best of the 3. I think the best potential of the 3 that we've got, because again, he looks like someone that's just gonna, he plays the position in the way that it should be played for the style of football that Celtic play. As we've said about Ida, that isn't always the case. So yeah, Kenny got us. Listen, happy for Kenny. He got his goal. It was a lovely goal as well. But I don't think intrinsically there's enough quality there just to be that Celtic league player. With Yamada, I don't know, but there was certainly hints of it, and I think he's got high end pace, and I think that movement and those 2 things together again suggests to me that having made the investment, give the guy the chance.
Yeah, James, it's a pretty low bar to reach, but it was refreshing to see on Saturday when Shin started somebody up front like that, trying to make the runs for people to find them, closing players down, looking to get space, that kind of thing. I think, as Alan says, it's going to be a while before we can judge him fully, but there certainly seems to be something there that I think can be utilised for the season going forward.
To me, it's an issue of what we have now. So I don't think we're going to sign 2 starting level Champions League level strikers this week. So there's some rumors that the guy from Cluj still, and we'll see. But I'm not even saying he's Champions League level. I haven't looked at him that closely. I mean, he scored a lot of goals at Cluj last season, but he's basically had one huge season at a decent level. So I what I'm saying is we're going to need a second striker. And plausibly a third to a degree. And I don't think, it doesn't look like Osman's ready for that. So is Adamita going to be content being third striker? Because if it comes down to which one do you want to see as second striker, I think Yamada offered, because of what Alan says, mean, if we finally sign a striker who's good at hold-up play, I'm not saying this guy from Cluj is. I haven't looked at him close enough yet. But theoretically, somehow we finally sign a striker who does what Rodgers likes to have his strikers do, and at a level that's, productive rather than the opposite. Then Yamada's a good change-up guy. Come in against the fatigued defense, who he can get in behind and use that pace, that kind of thing. Or if the game just calls for a different style of play, like, how Kyogo was deployed at striker. So I think he has that utility that's worth being one of the two, at least, if not the third. So to me, it's Almeida's the guy that's out of the mix here. I mean, to me, that's obvious at this point. So we'll see what happens by the end of the window. But we're going to have the inverse Marian Shved syndrome here, where I've got all these wingers, but Rodgers going to end up with all these strikers that some of them he didn't want, but it's his fault. He's the one that's not using these guys the way that they can actually perform reasonably well.
So Laura, I mean, obviously you were at the game, so I'm interested, because again, when you're watching on TV, you don't see the full extent of a lot of the off-ball movement, and also you don't get a sense of the speed to the same degree as you do when you're in the stadium. So what did you make of Yamada?
I think in terms of speed, before I talk about him individually, what I've noticed with the games in general this season is the players are playing the style that Rodgers wants them to play, but not at the speed that he wants them to play at. The first half is very, very slow usually. It's very ponderous, not just from the players who are passing the ball and who are on the ball, but from the players who are supposedly trying to make space or make themselves available for passes or throw-ins, which I am now totally paranoid with watching after watching all the throw-in coaching stuff that you guys did with Thomas last season. And I am utterly convinced, nobody can tell me otherwise, Kieran Tierney has had throw-in training. He absolutely has had, because it's on another level to what everybody else is doing. Everybody's just looking for the closest person they can get it to who's free. He's looking for a run. He's trying to use it as a pass of that kind of level. But yeah, going to Shin in particular, I don't know that I would describe him as fast. Certainly not on maybe Kyogo's level, but he's certainly got a work rate that's admirable, and I think tries to, in the same way that Inamura tries to make passes that are sort of outside of the box, if you like, figuratively speaking, not literally on the pitch, but he is definitely trying to make runs that once the players get to know him better, they will understand what he's doing and what they can look for. I think, as you touched on before, he is making runs that nobody is looking for at the moment, and therefore can make himself look like a bit of a headless chicken at times. But actually, I think it's just a case of familiarity. I have no doubt in my mind, of all the players, Engels and Benjamin Nygren will eat that up after a while once they get to play with him a bit more. But yeah, I think the speed of everything was picking up in the second half a lot more, just because some of the players need a bit of a rocket up their backsides at half time, I think. Yeah. Speaking of which, before we move on to the game tomorrow night, Alan, I'll come to you first on Benjamin Nygren. I think we'll maybe do a little bit more of a deep dive on him in coming weeks, because it's not going to be the last time that he puts in a performance like he did on Saturday. But how impressed are you so far with what you've seen from him and what he can offer us that's different to what we already had?
Very. I was excited before, and I've not been disappointed particularly since. So I think it's all good. Sorry, I'm just multitasking. I'll just bring up his numbers from the game, because I did have him as my boy of the match, as I cheesily call it. So if I just bear with me whilst I fiddle about in the background here. But no, listen, I think people have to understand.
Listen, Alan, in 2025, it's got to be player of the match. You've got to be correct.
All right, okay. Here we go. You've got to stick that up, James, if it's coming through. So yeah, I think people need to understand what kind of player he is. I think we need to take back. So I was a bit taken aback as the game was going on. There was a couple of WhatsApp groups of fellow fans, and in two of them in particular, he was getting it tight and he was getting slagged off. And I was like, and I think it's because mainly when he was out on the right wing, and nearly every time he got the ball, he kind of cut inside. And I kind of get that. That's what Forrester had been doing against Almaty, and I'm kind of with it on that. But they were kind of, slagging him off, and always he looks like a 1.2 million player and all this sort of stuff. And I'm just like scratching my head because, you've got to understand what sort of player he is, but also you've got to understand what sort of player he isn't, right? He isn't like a Paul McStay type midfielder. He's not a Callum McGregor type midfielder for that matter. He's not going to be one of these subtle, players. He's not even like a Matt O'Reilly midfielder in terms of playing little cute passes between defenders and linking the play and all that sort of stuff. He's actually quite a strong runner with the ball, but not necessarily a dribbler, like a sort of Messi-esque type dribbler. But he's quite strong at getting the ball up the field. He did have a good run in the lead up to the goal, actually, where he did kind of take out a couple of players with his dribbling. But I would say he's stronger at just really driving forward with it. But so he's not that type of midfielder. I would liken to, if you want to go back in Celtic history, the two names that sprung to my mind, having watched him for a little bit now, would be kind of Billy Stark or Joe Ledley. These are players who, they weren't the silkiest, they weren't the most skillful, but they scored a lot of goals for Celtic, and they did it because they broke into the box and they got in the end of stuff. And they were like almost the second striker, the one arriving a little bit later, the one arriving just behind the striker, the one arriving on the penalty spot whilst the striker's attacking the front post or the back post or whatever. And we've seen this already. We've seen it with two of the goals that he's scored, and that is invaluable. I think the nearest player we've had who takes up the runs and positions that he does was Leo Labada. He's probably more like Leo Labada, actually. Leo Labada wasn't a particularly tricky winger. He wasn't particularly skillful. He wasn't a great passer on the ball. His great super strength was arriving in the box at the right time and having decent technique to finish chances. And I think Nygren's more of that type of player, albeit from the midfield position. And he's got massive utility in that he can actually play almost anywhere across the front or the middle even. So I think he's an absolute bargain for the price that we paid. His number, I mean, there was no competition in terms of the numbers from the game, as well as the two goals, one of which he scored from the wing, one of which he scored from midfield. He had the highest overall packing score by 56. That's enormous, right? He had the highest attacking threat score. He had the highest number of passes received, joint most touches in the box, most shots from inside the box. He also created the most chances. He created 3 chances at the highest expected assist rate of anybody on the pitch, right? And he took out the most defenders in the game. He took out 10. So these are really strong numbers across a variety of skills, as well as being the match winner. So people slagging him off, I don't listen. I get it, right? In the sense of, I had this reaction with Quinny on Twitter last night. Quinny was quite enthusiastic about this Uruguayan left back that we're signing, and I was just miserable because I think that's where we are as a support moment. We're all just a bit miserable about the performance of the club, and maybe that's why some people are kind of hounding Nygren after one poor pass or one poor decision to cut inside rather than go on the outside. But he is going to, if he stays fit, he is going to be such an important player for Celtic. He's going to score a lot of goals.
Do you know, I'm going to stick up for Quinny here. Like, he's just quite a generally upbeat, enthusiastic guy.
And that's lovely. And I was that miserable bastard. That was me.
So yeah, no, I don't know if he'll prove to be right, but I'll let him get excited while he's got the opportunity to. But James, you might have a man crush on Inamura. I just have a straight up crush on Benjamin Nygren. He is everything I would want in a Celtic midfielder. I do think, as effective as he was out in the right, without a doubt, he's much more effective from the middle of the park. What do you make of Alan's sort of breakdown there of how he got on? Does it compute with what you saw and your overall impression of the way that he played on Saturday?
I was simpatico with Alan when he was signed, and I think, as I've seen him play now and digested some of Alan's analysis that he's put up on the site, as far as kind of risks that we're building into the way that we're playing this season so far, kind of structurally or out of possession and in possession relative to transitions, I'm not worried about Nygren relative to the role that Alan's describing. I mean, I think he's going to be highly productive. I'm more concerned about the composition of the rest of what we're doing with him as this attacking 8. And, he's not, I don't think he's not a classic box to box guy who's going to do a lot of the dirty work, so to speak. He's not going to have that physical presence. And so he's going to provide a lot of that going forward. To me, he's almost like, this is all conceptual. I'm just saying, if I could, I've talked about Engels to me is a wide right midfielder in a 4-4-2. Like, that's just when I look at what he's good and bad at, like that's what he should be playing in a system. For me, Nygren's one of the 2 10s in a 3-4-2-1. Right. So he's a narrow right-sided midfielder who should be crashing the box, but with a bunch of guys behind him to help him in transition. And we're not going to deploy him like that. So my concern is how much he's going to get caught doing what he should be doing, which is box crashing, and then what the hell's behind him, because it's not going to be Hatate and McGregor that are going to be the defensive, monsters. And now with Alistair Johnston out for 3 months potentially. So it's more so the implications of how he's used in what role within the system that I'm more concerned about. But I think I agree with Alan. Like, I wouldn't surprise me if he's right there for kind of player of the year contention because of just the raw scoring contribution that he makes. He could easily score 15, 20 goals from midfield and, approach double digits in assists. That wouldn't surprise me at all.
Yeah, I hate to say it, but I do wonder if Dyson's season last season was a bit of an outlier, and he is returning to the mean this season. But certainly, I think Nygren, if he continues the way he is, might be the new darling of the fans. For me, he needs to stop trying to hype up the crowd when it's 35 minutes and it's still 0-0 against Livingston. Give us something to cheer about, and we will cheer. Instead of flailing your arms about like a madman every time you go to take a corner. Apart from that, I do love the guy. But we'll go ahead and look briefly at the game tomorrow night, the away leg against Kairat Almaty. As everybody watching this will know, it's 0-0. The winner of this match does qualify for the league group stage of the Champions League. Hopefully that is us. Alan, I don't think there's much in the way of sort of technical analysis we can do in advance of the match. So I guess the question to ask you is, how likely do you think it is, or how that we will go through, or how at risk do you think we are of potentially slipping on a massive banana skin?
Yeah, there's a high risk, right? It's a long way. It's just the impacts on the body, which it was actually worse for them coming across the time zone in the direction that they did. It was actually worse for them coming to Celtic Park, and they did fine, in terms of physicality and effort and work rate and all that. So it shouldn't really be an excuse, to be honest. It's not actually for the body clock. The time that we're playing over there is not hugely disruptive for Celtic players, so that shouldn't be an excuse. There's a bit of altitude. I think it's less than 1,000 meters, and it'll be late into the evening, so it'll be warm, but it won't be like ridiculous. So none of these things should be really excuses for modern players. I don't think you've had the nice first class beds and that on the way over and all that. I think the unknown, it's not unknown, but the thing that I'm interested in that I still can't quite calibrate accurate in my mind is, how good is this team? How good is this opponent really? James and I kicked around the sort of ELO score, which basically placed them just above Falkirk and Livingston. And I think we agreed that because of the way that the Kazakhstan league is represented, that's probably a bit unfair and not particularly accurate. They're clearly better than that. But when I looked at we're all so frustrated last week because of the nature of how Celtic played, how frustrating it was, how it was obvious where the team was struggling, and how that correlated to the lack of activity in the transfer window. All those things caused a lot of dissonance amongst all of us, really. But again, when you watch the game back and you go through it, they weren't actually a very good side. Now, I don't want to I don't want to sort of poo-poo them, right? Technically, they're probably better than most teams in the Scottish Premier League. And I think from a coaching perspective and an organisation perspective, I thought they were superbly well organised. I think superbly disciplined and drilled in the job. They came for a 0-0 and they got a 0-0. They got exactly what they played for. In transition, I thought they were okay, but clearly their most outstanding player was the young winger, the young forward Satpayev, who is not going to play in the second leg. I think that's an enormous blow for them. He's clearly their most talented player. Even at 17, 18, or wherever he is now, 17 years old, he's a talisman for them. And his aggression, his work rate, his speed, his technical ability, his ability on the ball, brilliant. Clearly a top young player. That's a huge, huge loss for them. It was very telling to me that they only made one substitution at Celtic Park. There was an enforced one, the goalkeeper. And that's a huge blow because that starting goalkeeper looked very competent to me. He was very comfortable coming out for high balls. He was safe in everything that he did. He just looked a really solid, good goalkeeper. I think he'll be a huge loss for them as well. So, and the other two forwards were clearly, they had a nice thing going there, and I got a nice counter-attacking blend. The big tall Brazilian lad Edmilson was really a menace in the air, and the guy that kept falling over, Jorginho, is a good technical player. But I suspect without the others around him, he's a bit of probably a bit of a journeyman, really. I'm sure that will come back to haunt me, I'm sure. But I don't think he's got the
hat trick incoming, Alan.
Yeah. I know he's got the technical ability or the speed of Satpayev. They are dreadful. The two central defenders are objectively poor, and at some point they're going to have to try and score a goal. Yeah. So when you look at
this is no disrespect to any Scottish team, but what was it, Martin, the guy that Martinovic. Yeah. I could 100% see him playing centre back for Dundee or something like that. Like, it was just that.
He's like 30. He's like 38 or something. I mean, so when you actually stripped away all the kind of emotion and the ennui and the dissonance and just looked at the numbers from the game, granted they were trying. I mean, they broke pretty effectively. They looked dangerous in moments without really creating anything of any great note. The data looked like very similar to when Celtic have a really bad day at the office at home to Hearts. That's what it looked like. I think, and I would say they're probably at that kind of level. Now, they don't play like Hearts. The style of football is completely different. But I think that's broadly the level that they're at. So that means we could go there and lose. Absolutely. And we are going to go there, and it's going to be a really difficult game. But more often than not, we win at Tynecastle. More often than not, we do. And we should be winning this game. We should be beating a team of this calibre. They've got through 3 rounds, and fair play to them. I mean, it's a hell of a journey for them to have done that. But if you look at the teams that they've played on the way, they all lost badly in Europa League qualification or Conference League qualification on last Thursday. And in most cases they kind of just got through by a goal, and they've been helped by some terrible goalkeeping from the opponents. The penalty they got to beat Slovan, as I say, they'd have been blushing at Ibrox that had been given. It was that soft. So they've had some mighty fortune to get to where they are. They're a clearly very well coached team, but they've lost their superstar. Their first choice goalkeeper isn't playing, and I'm guessing they don't have a lot of strength on the bench, right? So if Celtic just need to stay in the game, no stupid mistakes, and I think we'll do it. I do think we'll do it. We're a better team than them. We just have to show it and just avoid these horrible things that happen on away games. The sort of the Nurbiton red card or the inexperienced other central defender, heading it straight to their striker. That sort of thing that we habitually have done in these sorts of games. We just need to be competent, and we need to play our natural game. And I would honestly be confident that we'd win. I really would.
Oh my God,
but,
Alan!
I'll change my mind. I'll change my mind tomorrow.
we just need to be competent away in Europe. Oh, honest to God. James, last word goes to you on this one. Are we going to make history and become the first Scottish club ever to win in Kazakhstan?
Yes, that's my least favorite heuristic for analysis. Neil Lennon won in Italy, for gosh sakes. So
Neil Lennon beat Barcelona.
Exactly. So the idea, we don't, the sample size, right? I know the sample size, et cetera, et cetera. So I fully expect us to go over there and win. I think this really is an acid test for Brendan Rodgers, though. Forget about all this soap opera of the summer. This is where he should be earning his £3 million a year. He's basically, been called out by the opposition manager a little bit. It's like put it on the in the locker room wall type of stuff. That should get his dander up a little bit. I think it did in the press conferences. At least it seemed to a little bit. So
that does seem like a very Rodgers thing to do, to say to the players, look what he's saying about me.
Yeah, well, fair enough. But there's no excuses here. Like, this is with their young winger out and their keeper out. I mean, who knows who they're going to end up playing at keeper? I mean, I think the guy that they brought in was, had barely had senior level football as their backup, and I think the youth guy who's the third keeper looked like he was, like my younger than my son who just went off to college. Like, he looked like he might be 18, 17. So there is no excuses here. I get why everyone is really worried, but we should have more than enough to do this, as long as we don't. And this has been my concern, is that because, as I kind of called it, the ecosystem has gotten so pensive and anxiety ridden, and there's so much kind of negative energy going on because of this cluster F of a transfer window and what's going on with the board and the controlling shareholder. Is I worry about that kind of falling down from the sky onto the players if they're kind of plugged into this.
James, sorry to interrupt. Given the performance in Aberdeen, do you think it'll be easier for this team to play away from home?
It could, yeah, to get away from that. There could be a certain distance benefit here, and again, I don't know. Hamish on Celtic AM had a Scotsman, a Celtic supporter who lived in Almaty, on his Monday show, who was characterizing. He actually went to a number of games there while he lived there. He was there for a couple of years, I think, at least. And he said it's not like some cauldron. It's not, so to your point, Alan, it very well could be kind of a more relaxing, and I don't mean that in a no effort perspective, but maybe from a pressure perspective, because these guys have been in a pressure cooker now for over a month. I mean, they have to, in the modern era, these guys are all getting something from social media or their ecosystem of friends or texts or whatever. So to get away from all that crap, I think could be beneficial. So, we'll lose 1-0 in extra time, and you and I can go jump out the window, Alan. But no, I'm in agreement. Like, this really should be, it's not going to be comfortable, but I think confident should be the baseline here. But I get why kind of the baseline for most people is not that.
Yeah, we can only cross our fingers and hope. There's certainly nothing any of the three of us can do about it. We'll be watching from many thousands of miles away.
Well, Laura,
yes.
The good news, if Alan and I are right, is we get to wake up and look forward to the draw on Thursday. I think it's Thursday.
Yeah, it might be.
And then look at who the Champions League opponents would be. So that's when you just start piling on the misery. Maybe we win, and then it's like, oh, great! Look who
I was sitting at the Kairat Almaty game last week, texting the family group chat saying, I hope to God we don't qualify, because if we have to come up against Liverpool or Man City or PSG, I dread to think what's going to happen. But obviously that remains the target.
With Anthony Ralston and Uruguayan journeyman at Champions League level.
Yeah, we sit behind the sofa, we count our money, and we don't watch the TV. That's the only answer.
Yeah, I think that's about right. And on that extremely positive note, I'll sign off. I'll say thank you very much to Alan and James for joining us. If you want more of the content we've talked about here, please consider signing up to the huddlebreakdown.com, where you'll get the articles from James and Alan, and you'll get the extra show that we do during the week. most weeks with Martin, sometimes with a special guest. And then you can also watch the entire backlog either on our YouTube channel or on huddlebreakdown.com. Thank you, James. Thank you, Alan. And if you have had sriracha sauce on your nether regions, male or female, just let us know in the comments.
Yes, please.
Thanks.